Hello, my name's Aviva, and today I wanted to share with you 10 books that I think would make really cool movies. This is just in theory though. I know that anytime you take a book and you make it into a movie, they're gonna have to adapt it in some way, change it up, make it different. And I didn't really think too deeply into this on how any of these books would actually get adapted. I just think that all of these books have potential to make really, really cool movies that I would love to actually personally watch. So anyway, with that said, I'm very excited to be talking about all the books in today's video because I never really get to talk about any of them. You hardly ever see any of these books on my channel unless you've been here for a very, very long time. I'm talking about a bunch of fantasies today. I even have a mystery to talk about, and then obviously I'm going to have a couple of romances for you. So anyway, with that said, let's just jump straight into the book. So the first book that I wanted to share with you today is A Darker Shades of Magic by V.E. Schwab. So this is an urban fantasy trilogy. There's 3 books. This is the first book, and happens to be, I'm not sure if this is actually in the midst of becoming a movie or not. I remember a couple of years ago, I saw something about this, but then I don't really remember seeing any updates of them actually starting production or anything like that. So even though this might actually be becoming a movie, I'm just mentioning it in today's video anyway, just in case it's not anymore, I still think that it would make a great movie. So if you're not familiar with this story, you're basically following this guy who is able to travel between parallel Londons. There's basically 4 Londons, and they all overlap each other, but they're all in completely different worlds. You first have Grey London, which is basically our world, and there is no magic going on there whatsoever. And then you have Red London, which is basically thriving with magic, and that is where our main character is from because he was originally born there. And then you have White London, which is filled with magic as well, except it's bad magic, and everybody from there is kind of evil of sorts. And then there's Black London, which used to have magic, but something bad happened there a very long time ago, and now nobody lives there. So you're kind of following this guy who's from Red London, and he basically travels between all of London, and he's kind of the ambassador for the Queen in Red London, and he just gives messages to all of the other high people in each of the respective Londons and sorts. So it's basically a very cool story. You're just following this guy, and then throughout the story you're going to meet a lot of other people who are able to travel between Londons, and you're going to meet other people who are from different Londons. And at one point there is a magical competition, and I remember that there's pirates in this book, and at one point you even go to this antique shop on a pirate boat in middle of the ocean or something like that. And just the way that the magic is set up in this world, and then the magical elements that go on in this story, I just think would make for the freaking coolest movie I probably have ever seen in my entire life. So if you haven't checked this book out yet, I highly recommend it. It is one of my favorite fantasy series. I did read it a couple of years ago, but at the time that I read it, I absolutely loved it and I was completely obsessed with it. So anyway, A Darker Shades of Magic by V.E. Schwab. But anyway, after that, I wanted to share with you a middle grade fantasy book, which is Nevermoor by Jessica Townsend. So this is the first book in the Trials of Morgan Crow. And I don't know how or why I ever read this book because I was so not into middle grade, even at the time that I read it. But I was hearing such good things that I just decided to check it out. And I actually thoroughly enjoyed it for what it is. So you're basically following this girl who thought that she was cursed, but really she's just magical or something like that. And she's 11 years old, and on the day of her birthday, this guy basically comes and steals her away because everybody says oh, she's gonna die on her 11th birthday, and then instead of dying, this guy just comes and takes her and brings her to this magical school where she basically has to go through a bunch of trials to either get in or not. So throughout the whole first book, you're following her going through a bunch of magical trials with all these other magical children to try and get accepted into this magical school. And then in the rest of the books, you basically follow her every year in her school year. Every year she gets a year older, and then you're just following her as she is becoming whatever magical being of sorts. I don't know if they call it witches or anything like that in this story, but either way, it's very Harry Potter but middle grade vibes in my opinion. And I just thought that this could be the whimsicalest movie I've ever seen. I don't know how they would actually adapt it, but I just think that this has potential to be such a freaking cool movie. If they would do it cartoon, if they would do it real life and just CGI it, I don't even know, but just the idea of this story I think would make an absolutely amazing movie that could potentially turn into a series, because there are 3 books at the moment out, and I'm pretty sure that she's planning to make either 3 or 6 more books, and it's going to turn from middle grade to young adult to new adult or something like that, as the main character gets older and goes through each yearing of school. I think that was the plan for this author, but honestly I haven't looked into this series for a very long time, so I don't know what's actually going on with it, but that's what I remember hearing at the time that I read this series 2 years ago. So either way, yeah, The Trials of Morgan Crow by Jessica Townsend. So after that, I also wanted to share with you this book called The Hazelwood by Melissa Albert. So it's It's actually pretty funny because when I read this book, I don't know, 2 or so years ago, I actually didn't really enjoy it, but I thought that the idea of it was really, really cool and that it gave off such like a vibe that I think that it would make a really cool movie and I'd actually enjoy the movie more than I enjoyed the book. Like, I just think that they could take this idea and make it into such a better movie, if that makes sense. So either way, you're following this girl who her grandmother wrote a book about like dark and twisted fairy tales, and her, like, she never really met her grandmother or anything like that. Like, she lives in like the Hazelwood, and like at one point, like, I think the grandmother died or something like that, and I think the girl comes across one of her grandmother's books that have all these dark and twisted fairy tales, and somehow she ends up going to like the Hazelwood where her grandmother had like written all of these books, and she finds out that all of the stories are true. And it is just such a twisted book. Like, the way that this book was just like set up and the way that it plays out, I just think that like there's so many layers to this story that I think it would make like just a really cool movie. I totally explained that like completely horribly, but basically I didn't love the book, but I think it would make a better movie, and that is all that matters. And if they're gonna make it, they should definitely make it like October Halloween vibes, because I just think that that is what this book screams. So yeah, anyway, The Hazelwood by Melissa Albert. But anyway, after that, I also wanted to share with you this book called Shadow Falls by C.C. Hunter. So this is actually the first book in, I think, like a 5 or a 6 book series, something like that. But either way, it is a YA paranormal romance where you're following this girl who, I forgot what exactly happened, but she basically got in trouble and her parents sent her to this like a summer camp of sorts for like troubled kids. And when she gets there, she basically finds out that like these kids are not normal. Like, some of them are vampires, some of them are werewolves, all of them are basically magical beings, and she wouldn't have been accepted into this camp if she wasn't a magical being herself. But she doesn't think that she's magical or anything like that. So throughout the story, you're basically trying to find out like why she actually got accepted. Like, what is it about her that let her get into this camp? So it's a very interesting story because, like, you know, she's bunking with like a vampire, and then she's gonna end up having a romance with like a werewolf and maybe like another vampire. Like, it's a bit of a love triangle situation. And I don't know, I read this book maybe like 10 years ago. Like, no joke, this book is like so old. I don't know if you can even tell, but it's like literally yellowed. But at the time that I read this book, I really, really did love it. Like, just like, keep in mind, I read it a long time ago, but I loved it in the moment that I read it. And I just think that it would make for a really, really fun story. Like, watching a bunch of like paranormal kids in a summer camp, like, I just think that it has potential to be a really cool movie. What am I gonna say? So yeah, if you haven't checked it out and you're into like YA romances with like a paranormal sort of vibe, then maybe check out the Shadow Falls series by C.C. Hunter. So yeah, that is that. And then I think this is the last fantasy that I wanted to share with you, but I also think that the Iron Fey series by Julie Kagawa would make a very, very cool series. So happens to be, I didn't love this series when I read it. I think I read it just like too late in life. Like, it was supposed to be like YA, but I felt like it gave off like very middle grade sort of like vibes. But it happens to be, I just think that it has a very cool setting that would make a really freaking cool movie. So in this book, you're basically following this girl who finds out that her father is like a Fey king, and that she is like, I don't even remember the whole story, but like maybe she's like in middle of a war. Like, I don't even remember, but like there's something going on with like a Fey war, and she is the daughter of a Fey king. And then happens to be she's going to end up going to like the Fey universe, and she's going to meet a bunch of these like magical Fey creatures, and she's going to fall in love with like a Fey prince and stuff along those lines. And it's a very like cute story, even though like I didn't love it at the time that I read it, but I just think that it would make a very, very cool movie. Like, the vibes for this book would just be so freaking cool. Like, it's so like steampunky. Like, in this book, I remember one like major thing about it was all of the little creatures. Like, there was so much detail into all of the magical beings in this world, and like she would keep meeting, like she met a cat at one point, and like there were so like steampunk little like creatures roaming around at all times. And I just think that like it would be such like an Alice in Wonderland sort of book. Like, all of a sudden this girl jumps into like a fairyland, and then all of a sudden everything changes, and it's like super CGI, and like all of these like animals just like walking around. And like, I just think that like it's got potential to be like visually extremely appealing, and it has a pretty solid storyline as well. Like, I just think like, you know, Alice in Wonderland vibes, like I just can like picture it being like an Alice in Wonderland sort of movie, you know what I mean? So anyway, I explained that really badly too, but I see it, you know, I see it in my head, and I think it would make a very cool movie. So Yeah, the Iron Fey series by Julie Kagawa. But anyway, after that, I also wanted to share with you this one mystery that is like a mystery romance sort of thing, and that is Be Still My Heart by Emily McIntyre and Sav R. Miller. So happens to be this is a romance mystery about this girl who is, I think, like either a profiler or an FBI agent of sorts. I don't really know, but either way, she gets this new job to figure out this mystery of who is murdering a bunch of people on this tiny little remote island that's sort of like a fishing town of sorts. And she goes there and then she meets the guy who had found the most recent body, and it's going to end up being their romance. And there is a lot of twisted and like weird stuff going on this like tiny remote island, and she's basically going to get mixed up in all of it. And the reason why I think that this would make a very cool movie is because I remember the time that I was reading this book, I kept thinking that it was reading like a movie. Like every single scene in it, like it literally felt like a movie scene. Like I felt like every moment like cut off as if it was like the end of a scene in a movie. So I just think like when I was looking at this book, I thought that it was like reading like a movie, and therefore I think that it would have a very cool movie potential. Like it's a mystery, it's a romance. I think that it's got things going on, and it would make a pretty solid movie, especially because I felt like it was already set up to be like half a movie script of sorts, if that makes sense. So yeah, I don't know. Either way, Be Still My Heart by Sav R. Miller and Emily McIntyre. But anyway, after that, I wanted to share with you a couple of romances that I think would make really cute rom-coms. And the first one I wanted to share with you is Meet You in the Middle by Devin Daniels. So this is very like The Hating Game, the Spanish Love Deception sort of vibe. Like it's a classic enemies to lovers rom-com. You're following these two people who both work for different senators. And one time this girl needed something from the senator that this guy works for. So she basically like set up a meeting with him, and then they have a very bad first meeting. And then they basically end up becoming like enemies of sorts, and they start playing pranks on each other because they're both working in the same building. And then it kind of just like, it turns into like a flirting sort of enemies, and then they somewhat become friends just because they just end up spending so much time together, and then obviously a romance is going to bloom from that. And I just think that would make for like the cutest freaking rom-com. Like if this book became a rom-com movie, I would like watch it in a heartbeat, even though I hate when like books are being made into adaptations because I always think they mess it up. I just think that like I see this happening in a movie. Like it would take place in Washington, D.C. You're going to be in the workplace environment. You're going to get all of the pranks going on throughout the book. And then all of a sudden you're going to see them starting to look at each other a little bit more. And then they're going to, like, all of the scenes that happen in this book, I just feel would make like a really amazing, like movie scenes. Like I don't really want to give anything away because like I really like this book and I think that you should definitely read it if you haven't read it yet. But basically, I just think that there are so many potential moments in this book that would make for really amazing movie scenes. And therefore, I just think that it would make a really, really cute rom-com movie. So if you haven't read this book yet, I highly recommend it because at the time that I read it, like a year or two ago, I really, really, really did love it. So yeah, Meet You in the Middle by Devin Daniels. But anyway, after that, I also wanted to share with you The Simple Wild by K.A. Tucker. So in this book, you're following this girl who is kind of like a very like modern day sort of like city girl. And she goes to meet her father that lives in middle of nowhere, Alaska, because she found out that like he's sort of like passing away, not really doing well. And if she wants to get to know him before he, passes away, then basically she should go and visit him for a bit. So she kind of like packs up her entire life and moves to middle of nowhere, Alaska to get to know her father. And when she's there, she basically meets this guy that lives next door to her father that also happens to work for her father as a pilot because her father owns like this pilot company because they are so freaking remote that is the only way to get things back and forth from their tiny town. Like they literally, like their taxi service is freaking planes. So basically it has a very cool setting for a book, and I think it would make very like Nicholas Sparks sort of vibes. Like The Last Song, the movie, like I feel like it could be like potential to be that sort of situation. Like it's very similar to The Last Song in the sense of like, what happens with the father and like how all of that sort of plays out. So I just think that if The Last Song was being able to be made into a movie, then this book would be made into a movie as well and be really cool in itself. So yeah, The Simple Wild by K.A. Tucker. Check it out if you haven't already because it is a pretty solid story. But anyway, after that, another book that I think would make a very cute rom-com is Josh and Hazel's Guide to Not Dating by Christina Lauren. So this is a friends to lovers sort of romance. You're following this girl who ends up becoming best friends with her best friend's brother. She's going to end up moving into his apartment for a little bit because because her house just recently got flooded and she had nowhere else to stay. So he had an extra bedroom and he's like, yeah, sure, come. We're already friends. Like, just come and live with me. What's the harm that's going to happen? And then once they're living together, they basically realize that they're both single and they have to get back out there. So they basically decide to set each other up on some dates, and then they're going to double date with each other with the dates that they found for each other. And then they're going to end up having a lot more fun with each other than they are with the dates that they got set up with. And then obviously they're going to end up falling for each other. So it's a very cute, simple, easy rom-com. And I just think that it would be like a very funny movie to be made, because this girl, she's got a really quirky personality. And I just think that like if they found the right actors to play these characters, it just could be a really, really solid movie. Like just the way that it's set up, like the idea of them going on dates all of the time, and then like, you know, them living together, and like, you know, the tension and the inks and everything like along the lines of like how this book played out. I just can see it happening in a movie. Like when I read this book, I'm just like, oh my God, this would be the cutest rom-com in the world. So if you haven't read this book yet, I highly recommend checking it out, because even though I haven't read it for a couple of years, at the time that I read it, I really thoroughly did enjoy it. And obviously it's kind of what got me into the romances that I read today, because it was the first adult contemporary romance that I ever read. So anyway, Josh and Hazel's Guide to Not Dating by Christina Lauren. But anyway, after that, the last book that I wanted to share with you for today's video is Come Back For Me by Corinne Michaels. So happens to be, I did not absolutely love this book, but I still think that it would make for a great movie, and I would totally watch the movie of it even though I didn't absolutely love the book. And the reason why I didn't love the book is because it was somewhat of a second chance romance. You're following these two people who basically had a one-night stand a bunch of years ago, and they never really even got each other's names or anything like that. They just kind of like went their separate ways. And now it's like, I don't know, 9 years later or so, and they find themselves in the same small town, because this guy, he just got out of the army and he just moved back home, and this girl now happens to be living across the street from her and is married to this guy who is kind of abusing her. So definitely have to look up some trigger warnings in this book for like alcoholism and like abuse, physical abuse, all those sort of stuff. And anyway, she happens to be a single mom as well. And then this guy is basically going to remember her, and he's going to be like, oh my God, I almost thought that I like dreamt you up, because like I had such a great night with you, but like, you know, I never really got your name and I didn't know if like that actually happened or not. You know what I mean? But anyway, she was actually real, and now she's living across the street from her, and he realizes that she is not in a great situation. So he is going to basically help her and her daughter get out of, you know, their house and everything like that. And then he's going to take care of them, and then they're going to basically get their second chance of sorts. So it happens to be, even though I didn't like the book because I'm not super into reading like second chance romances, I don't mind watching second chance romances. And I just happen to think that this would make for like a really, really solid movie. Like it would have like a lot of seriousness sort of things to it, but it would also have like a really cute, heartwarming, like, you know, pull at your heartstrings sort of romance. So I just think that it has potential to be a very good romance movie. So yeah, Come Back For Me by Corinne Michaels. If you're into second chance romances and you don't mind a little bit of a more serious tone in your romance books, then maybe you wanted to check it out. But yeah, that is about it. So those are 10 books that I think would make really cool movies for all the reasons that I just listed in the past 20 minutes or so. So happens to be, I had a really hard time choosing just these 10. Like I had so many books that I think would actually make really amazing movies. So if you enjoyed watching this video and you wanted to see me do it again, then let me know down in the comment section below, because I would be more than happy to make a part 2 of this, because I literally have like stacks on stacks of books that I just think have potential to be really amazing movies. So anyway, with that said, again, if you enjoyed watching this video, leave me a comment down below, but also give this video a like. Also subscribe to my channel if you're not currently subscribed, because I would really appreciate it. But either way, I appreciate you watching this video. So thank you so much for that. And until next time, enjoy reading.